Hello everyone, welcome to today's KeyShot webinar. Today we're going to be talking about KeyShot 3.1 and some of the new features and improvements that have been added into it. Also with me I have Brian Townsend to answer your questions while you watch the webinar. So one of the things we're going to be working with is this watch file, and we're going to be looking at how we can better use the animation system now in 3.1 with some enhanced functionality so that we can do this animation a little bit more organized. We're going to be looking at metallic paint flakes. So of course we've always had metallic paint in KeyShot, but now we have these physical little flakes, so I'll show you how to tune those up. We're going to be looking at a new thing called material templates that allows you to quickly paint up your models, especially those who work with the same kind of models, same kind of products. You use a lot of the same material names from the modeling software. We're going to allow you to automate your material application process in KeyShot. We're also going to be looking at the environment editor. It allows you to take an existing HDR environment, like this one here, and sort of push and pull lights and desaturate things and adjust whatever you might need. We're going to look at texture mapping, and also we're going to just show that we have a Maya importer. So let's start out with just looking at this Maya importer. So I'm going to close this scene here. Now I have this Maya binary file for my watch, and just like all of our other importers, we can now just drag and drop that in. Now what I'm going to show you here has to do with the material templates. Under advanced here, you see this use material template. This is what we're going to be making with this file so that next time we import this, we can speed up this process. But we don't have one yet, so I'm just going to leave that unchecked and click OK. So we'll get this Maya file in there. All right. So now, of course, we can go ahead and start painting it up. So I'm just going to get some materials here. So before we animate this with the new animation options, we're going to go with material templates. So the way material template works is it looks at what comes in by default on the model. You see the default state of the model by opening up the project tab and going into the scene tab and looking at the materials. Okay, apparently the sound is not so good. Give me just a second and we will get a better sound system on here. Okay, so you should be able to hear me a little better now. Let's just make sure. Can you just confirm that the sound is better now, Brian?
Yeah, that's better.
All right, great. Sorry about that. Let's get back underway here. All right, so like I said, we're going to be working with material templates here. And so what that means is we're basically going to look at what we have default here in KeyShot. These inner links, for example, had a material called Chrome applied in Maya. So what we can tell material templates is that anything that comes in with a default material named Chrome, you can tell it to apply some specific material from the library. So, and we have actually two options for how we want to control this. I can actually open up my material templates menu here under Edit, Material Templates, and I can simply click the plus button on this material 1, just a completely empty list. Let me say add item, and for the source, and then I can take the depth become. Let's see what we have here. If I wanted it to be Chrome Bright, I can start typing in here. The other option I have for applying the material to the destination name is actually drag and drop from the library right onto the menu here. So I can apply anything I want to this Chrome Circular Mesh material. And that template is now saved. Now when I restart here and open up the KeyShot again and drag and drop, I can go under Advanced. So in the KeyShot Import Settings menu, under Advanced, enable Use Material Template, New Template 1, OK. All right, so now you can see every part that had that Chrome default material applied now has the Chrome Circular Mesh material applied. So that's one way to make a material template. The other way is to, let me just restart KeyShot here so we can have a nice fresh scene. Going to, again, bring this in. And instead of applying the material template, I'm going to make a new one by first applying materials to the model. Then I'm going to let the template system auto-populate a list of material items for me. So all I need to do is, just like normal, go in and drag and drop some materials. So let's find, if we want to do a stainless steel on the band here, maybe just a different metal on the inner links there. We'll get a glass. Drop that on the front there. Little trick here. So the reason this looks so dark underneath the glass is because global indirect illumination is not enabled, or detailed indirect illumination. There's a hotkey for this now, which is the I key. So press I, and it starts to illuminate underneath that glass. So let's see what else we have. I can also hide the glass so I can get under there to the rest of the parts. And we'll just apply some basic materials. Just put that there. Maybe this here. Maybe that one there. And just get the hands here. Now, this is kind of a complicated model, and there's a lot of illumination and shadow effect going on. What I want to do is use performance mode with the Alt-P hotkey to get rid of all those advanced effects so that I can really concentrate on just applying materials. I'm just going to use the hotkeys Shift left click to select a material, and then Shift right click to paste that material onto other parts. I'll just quickly apply that to the various parts here. All right, good enough. And maybe just get a plastic and put that in there, apply that over to here. Okay, and then one more, maybe a spun texture. I believe we have that in here. You can just put in, use the search function here to find what I'm looking for. So we'll just do a silver spun and drop that right on there. And you can see that has kind of a cool bump texture to it. All right. And let's just apply something to the crown there. There we go. And to the back. So now we've just done some basic material work in KeyShot. And I want KeyShot to make a template based on everything I just did. So I can do exactly that. I can just go into my template menu, under Edit, Material Templates. So this is my old template here. I'm just going to delete that one. I'm going to say Material Template New. You can, of course, have multiple, but I'm going to keep it simple. It's just one here. I'm going to call this just Test 2. Okay. And you can see it automatically creates all these little items here. So, of course, if I wanted to say chrome, instead of being stainless steel brush to light, maybe I want a different material, I can still go in here and edit this, if I want it to be this one here. So aluminum horizontal, or I can change that to leave that aluminum brushed. Now, just discard that, start a new session here. Drag and drop the file into KeyShot, advanced, use material template, click OK, and that'll come in just like I had it before. So this is useful for when you're updating models, but it's also very useful if you have sort of a workflow with your modeling software where you use a lot of the same materials, and one model on various parts that's named Chrome that has a material applied to it automatically. And Brian will let me know in a little bit if there's some animation stuff. So let me just apply. So the animation, and you'll see, the answer to create your animations. So I'm going to do a translation group. Let's just grab the entire watch part. So let me say next, and just make this animation here. So let's see, I want that to come out this way. So I'm going to do 0, 0. Should have known that would be on the Z. All right, so I'll just bring that out like that. First animation. And now I'm going to open up the scene tree. This animation here. I can copy it, components, I can select both of them, and I can say paste animation to that multi-selection of parts. So that's a new feature, pieces of your model, and copy and paste animator. And because I used copy, paste, and not paste link, these are 3 unique of them. We can just look at the one on the entire, these best are names, face translation, just give these some labels. Internal, there we go. So then the internal, there we go, that's a little bit better. Do performance mode to kind of smooth that out for you guys. Version of KeyShot is this, it was however you applied them was your other. So I can create a new, it's kind of nice to just have them sort of follow down the line here. Animation, but now I want it all to go back to its original position. Click, I can say mirror. When I say mirror, it will create a duplicate of the animation and then reverse its value. So let me just turn these 2 off for now. Back in. So before you would have to do that manually, now you can just do it with one simple click. You can also just call this relations. I can actually right-click on that folder itself and mirror it. And it'll mirror those all within that folder for us. So notice that there's a duplicate. So if I want, I can actually say right-click those animations together. So another thing, I can actually grab these in the timeline that have to be in the folder in order to move together. Here, I can just move these around all day long. The folder there. We have in the timeline. And you also have the ability to multi-select animation in the timeline here, as in terms of layers, but also within the time skid is you can multi-select and you can. So we can make a new translation, copy. Can even do paste linked onto these 2, and now those will move together. Right. Let's see what else we have. Paint Flakes. Just going to open up a new scene here. There we go. All right. Just make that a nice large window so you might be able to pick things out a little bit better. Paint to my metallic paint. Flake size and metallic flake size. Actual physical flakes are not showing. The old fashioned, and you can sit down, change the metal color. Metal mixture here with some blue and some red always is done. But now the Duro, that's when we start to have what we have going on here. We're in a desaturated. So let's just go back to there, was E to get to a color background. So basically E for environment. First of all, I'm going to crank the effect there. There you are. You'll see the flake, it's this procedural pattern. Our metallic flake size is to be quite so big, so let's just bring that down a little bit. It's a mixture of physical flakes. So something that's moving out, which seamless physical flake and do is bring the default of 1, metallic flake effect. Bring the samples up to me, we don't have quite such an extreme effect. Middle flake size up, and you start to and you get big. And the old. So if I bring this, if I have it spaced, just to entirely, this highlights might get a much down in flake size down. Over here, the size and roughness, maybe as though those flakes also has an effect. And each one is a little So they're all randomness it's really in the same direction. And the highlights, the metal roughness, and just see as more and more flakes from out that's because single of each little flake everywhere on the surface basically. This sec so far. I'd set my base that I want, white version of the same. And to bring my metal a little bit crazy, use the flake size. Those and you can nice little setting into play here. Really embedded in this a little bit in size here. Camera over a little bit. This whole paint drop model move to be X. Right, so I'm just going to bring it over to the other side of the frame here. Bring my ground size up off just to speed up my little. Bring the metal flake size all the way up so we can really of this animation. What we're seeing is the highlights are their metallic flakes moving with the model. That's compared to metal flakes. This is the old simulation of metal flakes. When I do this, upping the quality on the preview. That's right here. Let's just try a preview again. Well, might be hard to do the simulation of metallic flakes. It's almost as though it gets a new noise pad metal effect. You won't see what we would call like a swimming effect through noise, more realistic. Go ahead and do there. So that's basically your metal flake. You know, we can to actually bring up the Viper. So we'll do the metal flake effect on the Viper, and I'll also show you. So let's say you had metal flake enabled on a model like this, and you're doing an image just like this. Well, in real life, you're not necessarily going to be able to pick up each little flake in the paint from this far away. So that's why we have the old method, the old metallic flake effect still in there, because it's actually more optimized for a further away camera so that you don't need to see each and every little flake. But if I wanted to do a render of this where I was looking at doing a detail shot of the mirror here, then I really want to be able to pick up those flakes. So I'm going to right click. I'm going to bring my flakes into play here. So that's a little bit big. Let's bring those down. Just to exaggerate the effect, all right. I can also rotate my environment a little bit to get more of a highlight right on the edge here. So of course, the metal flake size needs to come down quite a bit. So just keep bringing that down. All right, so let's see what that looks like. Now it's pretty extreme again because I have metal flake visibility all the way up. And I also have my metal coverage pretty high. So I'm going to bring that down a little bit. And maybe bring my metal roughness around there. All right, so, and then we'll dial back flake visibility. So we can look at the effect of the flakes here. Still, I want to go a little smaller. Let's just keep bringing that down. And I want a little bit better lighting, so something with a little more highlight to it. I'm going to go grab something out of the environment library. Try the, all right, so there's our desaturated conference room again. This really gives a nice effect. So still pretty crazy flake effect there. Let's see where our metal roughness is at. All right, so that's pretty cool. Let's just let that res up for a sec. Okay, so for a close-up render like this, if I wanted to capture the flake effect of a paint, I would definitely dial in the metallic flake size and visibility to show the effect. I might continue to tune this down so that it's more and more subtle, especially on a car paint. Oftentimes we're not going to have all that crazy of a paint effect. But if I went from this image here to a like a broad 3/4 view of the car, I don't necessarily need to see each and every little flake. So KeyShot has built into it optimization to basically fade physical flake effect away when you're too far to see it. So if I start moving this camera back, you're not distracted with all sorts of crazy metal flake effect. You know, you still get the simulated flake, but it's the more optimized method of showing it. All right, so now also with this car, we're going to go ahead and now take a look at environment editing. So I've already been using an environment that we used our environment editor to create, which is this desaturated conference room. So I'm just going to bring the height back to 0 here. All right, so this is one example of what you can do is basically just remove all color so you get a nice neutral environment. Comparing that to, let's just bring the color background back. So if I brought in the original, you can see the color effect the environment, this really warm environment has on this. One environment that I really think benefits from a little bit of editing that we ship with the software is this one here. So we'll take a look. I'm going to bring my environment into view here. So you can see this environment has a very bright source of light over here. It's very sort of dark over here. This also has a backplate that I like to use, this one here. Okay, so this backplate, I'm just going to line things up. I'm going to use the camera to position my car in the backplate. One thing that's definitely an issue here is that my camera focal length is not matched up to this backplate. So let's take a look at what this backplate was set to. You can see in the overlay there, it says it was shot at 46 millimeters. So that measurement is equivalent to, under the camera tab, the focal length, 35 millimeter equivalent focal length slider. So I just need to type in 46, and then bring my camera back in, and now I have my car in the right sort of perspective. Now I need to get my environment and backplate rotated correctly so that they match up in terms of shadow direction, highlights, and all that. So if we press E to get back to the environment background, we can kind of see what's behind. So I'm just going to use my control left click to rotate this until I see the same sort of background as I see in the backplate. I'm going to press B to get back to my backplate, B as in backplate. So maybe I'll just rotate that a little more to about there. So you can see I'm matching up this little piece of the wall here to that in the environment. And I can go in there and go into my environment and maybe change the height a little bit, make it a little higher. Maybe that'll help. Just line things up perfectly. But that's definitely close enough. So now that's a pretty good image. It's not bad. We have accurate lighting for the scene, but it's not necessarily what we want for a final product. One thing that I'm definitely noticing is that the whole hood area here is just very dark. We really only have highlight here. And that's because this environment is really only giving us light from off to the right here. One thing that's bothering me is that this is not quite touching the ground, so I'm just going to grab the model here. Hopefully I can just nudge this down a little bit, the move tool. There we go. Yeah, it's a little better. Feels a little more planted. All right. So what we're going to do is use the built-in HDR editor to open up this environment and just push and pull light a little bit. Maybe we'll take down light in this area and we'll add some light in this area. So to do this, go to Environment, Edit, Lexion KeyShot HDR Editor. There we are. And now we're in a live editing mode where everything we do in here will update here. So let me just make this window a little smaller so we can see both a little bit better. Okay. So let's see here. Now, first thing we can do, I'm going to press E to bring back the environment background just so we can kind of see the effect. Let's take a look in the environment editor. Basic UI includes the adjustment tab, and the pins tab. So starting with the adjustment tab, one of the most useful things in it is the saturation slider. You can see we can bring the saturation up or down. If we want to really exaggerate the colors, we bring it up. If we want to make a very neutral environment, we bring it down. Now, especially if we had a more neutral paint, just sort of a mid-gray here, then we'll really see the effect of color on our model. So basically with materials, one thing to know is a material is not just what is set in the material tab. The materials really are dependent on the environment. So this paint here will look completely different in any of these environments. The studio environments will all give a very similar effect because they are neutral environments. But any interior or outdoor scene is going to have a very different effect on your paint. So it's going to read differently to the viewer with different lighting. So one of the best ways to make it read the way you want it is bring the saturation down on the environment so that you can control better the colors of the paint all through only with the material editor rather than sort of a mixture of material and environment colors. Now let's say you do want the color from the environment, but you want to just, maybe this blue over here, you want to shift the hue of it a little bit. You can just use the hue slider, and that will shift the colors. So anything that started as green, for example, well, anything that started as red, if I shift it over into the green, it'll become green. But because it is a shift, it matters what the starting point is. So if there's colors in your environment that started as green in this area, and then you shifted it about 120 degrees, that would shift it from this area over to the blue area. So greens will become blue. So you can just see the effect. Now this is very useful for, let's say we had let me just discard this environment quickly, go to one of our studios. We have several of these studio environments that have color in them. So let's say you're using this environment here, doing an image something like this. Well, you can edit this environment. And this is a perfect one for shifting the hue. You can create any background color just by shifting that hue. Is that color too much? Well, then we just bring the saturation down. Do we want some crazy color? Bring the saturation up. So you can really create any color environment from one of these. Let's go ahead and discard that one. Just going to come back to my urban sort of factory thing here. And about there to match up with the backplate. Cool. All right, so now we have too much light on the side here, not enough light over here. I'm going to work with my backplate showing now so that I can kind of think of this as a final image. Bring up the environment editor. And I'm going to use the pins to equalize the materials. So take a pin, go to add, and that'll bring in a pin. You can see its effect immediately. It's actually hitting kind of where we wanted it already. So I can grab this pin, move it around. You can also see if we hide the environment or hide the backplate, can make this pin show here. See how that's updating in the real-time window. So I'm going to use that to position the pin so that it hits in the hood area. And then I can take the brightness of this pin, bring that up, and that starts to create more light on that hood. And bring the backplate back. Now this pin right now is set to non-blend mode, which means it's kind of adding a white color over the existing environment. I can take that and change the color to create sort of a colored light. Or I can use blend mode, and that will actually edit the existing values of the environment rather than adding over it. So you'll take the colors that already exist here, and with the brightness slider, basically pulling some more brightness out of there. So if we have this down low still, you can see the original effect. If I turn off the pen entirely, so it's very dark here. If we bring the pen back on, we bring the brightness up, you can start to get more light on that hood. You can also bring the size of the pen up. And then the last setting here is the fall off. You can see the effect that has. At 0, there's a very sharp edge where that pin has an effect and then where it does not have an effect. All right, so we can just move that pen around until it kind of gives us the effect we want. You can also still, while it's in blend mode, I can still actually tint the pen. So if I want to add, I kind of want it to have some green light, I can do that. More often I might just want a little bit of subtle, maybe some blue light or some warm light. Just kind of keeping that subtle here. I can add another pen to start fresh with a brand new pen here. Move that around if I want that to hit up here. Or I can also select a pin and click duplicate. That'll give me a pin with the same settings as before, and then I can just move that into a new position. So you can see this pin, if I put it over where there's already a lot of light, it really adds a lot more light. Well, I can take that same pin technique and dial that light down from the other side of the car. So if I start going into the negative values, I'm just going to make this a neutral pin. We can darken that original light source. So here's the original, and then there's with it darkened. So you can really use these pens to equalize lighting, so you don't really have these really bright spots and then dark shadowed areas. Going to add another pin here. Basically have 2 pin shapes. You have circular and rectangular. If you're trying to maybe mask out a wall, you might use rectangular. And then you can increase the width. You can see how that's sort of matching the distortion of the wall that it's up against there. Just bring that up a little bit. And that still has the same other settings. So if we want to blend that, maybe give it some color, just make that wall green, how about? And then bring the brightness up a bit. And we're reflecting a green wall into the front of the car. Again, if we turn blend off, it's more of an overlay effect over the existing environment rather than manipulating the existing values. Kind of see the effect there. All right, so there's your pins. Back over on the Adjustments tab, another setting you have in addition to saturation hue is an actual colorize. So let's say you started with an environment. I'm going to start with a different environment. So to save what I've done here, what I can do is go to File, Save As, and this will save as a HDZ format. Call this my green wall environment. Save. You can see what it does now is exports a full res environment to KeyShot. So just need to let that process. And there we go. So now I can always come back to that environment. So if I go into my library and drag and drop some other environments here, I can still, let me just refresh my interior library. If I load in this green wall one that I made, it's not just an environment file. at this point. It's now actually a project file for our environment editor. So I can open that up, and all those pins still exist. So I can grab them, move them around, and I can continue to colorize and do those sorts of things. Speaking of the colorize setting, let's say you're starting with a studio environment that's completely grayscale, something like this. If you bring that into the environment editor, you can, of course, go in and add pins, just like before. So I can grab a pin, put it up to the top of the environment, make a top highlight, increase the brightness. And this environment is a good example of what's happening to optimize this. You can see sort of a rough, low-res environment here in real time. But if I either save the environment or I go to Edit, Generate High Resolution for KeyShot, it'll output the full res until you make another change. So now if I make another change, it'll go back to a down-resed version to speed things up. So now with an environment like this, you can use, you'll see that saturation doesn't have an effect because there is no color. Hue has no effect because there is no color. Colorize will allow you to add a color over the entire environment. So I can make a blue environment, just bring the brightness up a little bit. Oh, that's my contrast there. There we go. So I can create a color tint to my entire environment. Now let's say I wanted overall this ambient sort of blue effect, but I want a contrasting warm effect from a pin. Well, I can take a pin and give it some color. And then I can create that sort of contrasting color effect. Generate high resolution for KeyShot. And there we go. So if I close this, I'm prompted to save. So you can choose to just save, discard, or cancel. Just leave that open. Now the environment editor is a pro-only feature, so the non-pro version will continue. You'll have, of course, the brightness and contrast settings here in the environment tab, but you will not have the edit button. That is a pro-only feature. All right. So we have just a couple minutes left and one more thing to show, which is the improvements to texture mapping. I'm going to open up we like bikes around here at KeyShot, at Luxion. So let's work with a bike model. So the improvements we've made to texture mapping are based around the texture manipulator. So the way I'm going to show this is with, I'm going to double click on my model here. And I'm going to load in a new label, textures. And then in textures, I have a labels folder, and I just have a KeyShot icon here. So I'll bring that in. All right, so of course the default way of working with a label is with normal projection mode. Click position, click where you want it, and it projects. You bring the scale down, and it sort of projects based on where you clicked, which works okay. But if I wanted to get this label to wrap around the head tube here and have it a little larger, it of course isn't going to work because where I clicked kind of curves around, it starts to distort. So what I really need, of course, is a cylindrical map. So I'm going to change this over to cylindrical. Of course, it's not going to be perfect every time. So we're going to click Mapping Tool. And now the big difference here is that this mapping tool, as you move it around, center point of the mapping, so the cylinder that the mapping is based on exists, ending up with how you see it. To translate this, I'm just going to close. Use my scale. Go in here and on the tube a little bit, open the position button. That allows me to just click to project where I want that label to be. Now, the cylindrical mapping does have a seam basically on one point where it wraps around. So I need to now use my rotate tool to fix this. So the rotate mapping tool, and I'm going to take it and just rotate this mapping 180 degrees. Now my seam
is back here. You can see that it's back there. Now, again, position tool, click sort of right in the center, and that'll position that. Now, of course, this is distorted, and that's because you have to tell KeyShot how much you want this logo, this label, to wrap around that cylinder, and that's done with the X and Y scale values. So if I bring my Y down, that's going to start wrapping that logo around the cylinder. So you can really wrap it almost all the way around to the back. You wrap it, or you can just bring that down. I'm going to bring that down uniformly. Something about like that. And again, I can always click my mapping tool, move this. Now that also applies to the box map and spherical mapping. They're center points that you see the big change from the previous version. Network rendering. Network rendering is available to anyone with KeyShot, and any of you that have used our network rendering system in the past, you'll really appreciate the improvement. Basically, the way the network rendering system works is you have a simple program that is installed. It's one installer, and you install it on every machine on your network that you want to be involved in the network rendering in any way. So that means there's basically three types of systems. There's the master, there's slave systems, and then there's the client systems, or clients that have access to the queue. These client systems that access the network rendering queue, these are the systems with KeyShot that you actually send the network rendering jobs from. So once you install the network rendering installer, you then will have in your start menu on Windows or in your applications, you'll have a network render queue program and a network render configuration program. So if you open up the configuration program, this is where you set your systems up as either the master, a slave, or in the case of the master, it can also be a slave. So this system here is a slave. So if I click through the steps, next, you just have some simple network settings. You can leave these almost always at default. And then you have just the service start and stop itself. So if we hit stop, this system will no longer act as a slave. Hit start, and it'll come back online. The queue program, network rendering queue, this is where you see, and this is where you manage your jobs. So I'm going to open up my slave status here. You can see from the MAC address, this is my computer. So I have only 2 slaves right now. If I hit stop, that system goes away. If I hit start, let's just take a second and it'll come back online. There it is. All right, so now I can render on both. To render an image on the network render, all I have to do is go to the Render tab, and at the point that you have KeyShot Network Rendering installed, this Send to Network button will be enabled. And when you click Send to Network, it will render either your image. So let's just open up our queue program here. You can see this was added and is rendering. It basically renders out. And what it does is then, once it's completed, it saves the image back to your system. And there you go. Now this also works with animations, so you can just kick off basically any process through the queue. I'm just going to do a large image here, send to network. So you can see this is preparing and then rendering, and we can watch the preview as it renders. And while that's rendering, one of the big advantages here is that I can go in, I can close this entirely. I could actually shut this computer down, not only in terms of the queue here, I can say quit, but I can also actually shut down the slave. So if I go back here into the configuration, slave mode, hit stop, this computer now is no longer rendering as a slave. And when we come back onto the queue, we get a connection from the master. You'll see here, you'll see now we only have 1 slave. So it's very flexible. I can sit here and just click start and stop all day long, and it will add and remove that slave without any effect on the final render. That render will render on whatever slaves are available. It doesn't need to keep a constant connection. then in terms of the queue here, this doesn't have to be open during the render process. KeyShot doesn't have to be open. You don't really have the computer you send your job from. You can shut that computer down and then come back in the morning. And when you open up your laptop and open up the queue, it'll download your image because that image is stored and managed on the master until it gets a connection from you. And really, it's there until you actually hit delete on the job. That's the only time at which that image will go away from the master. But that when you do delete from the queue here, it still exists on your system. So that's your so the master process. You know, the master should be one system on your network. In my case, I have it on my this one here. So the master is very important, of course. It manages all the jobs. It sends little render jobs to each of the slaves and then waits for a result back, and then at the end it compiles all the results and gives the original system that sent the job, it gives it back the result. Now the network rendering system, the master, also controls the license. So you don't have to license each system. You don't have to have a new license on each of your systems with KeyShot in order to enable network rendering. You don't have to license each slave. You don't have to have KeyShot even installed on any of the slaves or the master. Instead, all you have to do is put one license on the master system. So here's my, just going to hit finish on that configurator. So here's my network configuration. So I'm going to go on my server here. This is where I have my master. Go to master mode. So this is where you do your license. So through the configurator tool, you can say, I want to install a new license, click Next, and you say Request License, fill this out, and then you basically create a license request, send it to us, we activate it, and then you say Select License File, and then that detects it, click Next. Simple network settings again, just like on the slave, leave these default, click Next, and click Finish. So, and that's all there is to it. Once you have the master running and the slaves running, they connect automatically. They talk to each other automatically over your network, and then you just send your jobs from KeyShot through the network. All right. So that's basically what I was going to show. I believe we have. Oh, of course, with the network rendering, the whole point of it is to speed up rendering. So if you can add 2 systems, then that's going to be twice as fast as rendering on just one system. So the more slaves you add, the more CPU cores you add to your network, the faster that's going to be. And being KeyShot, we fully utilize the CPU, so it's a completely linear increase in performance as you increase the amount of slaves on your network render system. So that's the whole point. All right, so that's my presentation, and then we'll get into if there's any questions that I need to address.
Can you say about material templates so like create one?
So the material templates are stored as just a simple file here under KeyShot 3 material templates. So you could take this folder here. So this was my template folder, my template for the watch that we made. You'll see if I take this whole folder and put it on a new system, it will actually work as a template on that other system. So you can create one to be used elsewhere. And basically you need all the contents of the folder. So it has copies of each of the materials that are needed to make that template work. That way if the system you bring that template onto doesn't have the same library, it doesn't matter because you're putting the materials right there with it. And then this right here, the KMT, that's your material template file. So that's going to be the thing that actually shows up in KeyShot as a template. Anything else to address live, or should we just stay online and type for a while? Okay, great. So it looks like most of the questions have been answered. Of course, if you didn't get your question answered during today's session, just send your comments or questions to support@lexion.com, And of course, another place to get involved with KeyShot is KeyShot.com. You'll see our pretty new site. And then, of course, within KeyShot.com is the forum. And if you're not on here, definitely get on here so you can see all the amazing shots that are being done. Here's something relevant to today's webinar, the new metallic paint effect. So either send your comments to support@lexion.com, or get on the forum and get involved with the community. And we will see you next time. We'll stay on for just a couple minutes answering your questions, but that'll about do it. So thank you for joining, and we'll see you on the next one.